Hello, this is Jason Nunez, one of the hosts of Journeys of Hope. If you would like to join us in our mission as missionaries of hope by supporting this program, please consider sponsoring a month via our wish list at pilgrimcenterofhope.org. Thank you. Now, here is your journey of hope.
Journeys of Hope, an introduction to the universal church that promotes an attitude of pilgrimage among the faithful by introducing you to pilgrim destinations around the world.
Welcome to Journeys of Hope, your spiritual passport to sacred destinations around the world, placing you in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, the Apostles, and the Saints. I'm Angela Sealana, Media Coordinator for Pilgrim Center of Hope, a nonprofit ministry founded in 1993. For the last 28 years, Pilgrim Center of Hope has led well over 80 authentic spiritual pilgrimages to various pilgrimage destinations throughout the world, equipping us to lead you on audio spiritual pilgrimages. Journeys of Hope, along with broadcasting over the radio airwaves, is also a podcast available through major podcast apps and on our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. Our journey today will be a pilgrimage through the Catholic roots of San Antonio, Texas, beginning at the site of the first Catholic Mass along the river. On our journey today, you will learn about the history of San Antonio's Catholic roots, travel spiritually to some of the associated destinations, and learn about opportunities for us today to continue appreciating these deep roots. For myself, being a native San Antonian and cradle Catholic, this spiritual pilgrimage is very special to me, and I immediately knew who I wanted to invite alongside us as a fellow pilgrim and a guide. Joining us is Rebecca Simmons, Executive Director of El Camino de San Antonio Missions. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you. Rebecca, could you tell us a little bit about your personal and professional connection to the missions?
Well, I came to the missions really kind of passionately because I am a lawyer and a former judge by trade. But when I was traveling to Mexico many years ago, 20 years ago, let's say, to Querétaro and Zacatecas, I became aware of the Franciscan colegios or schools that trained the priests who ultimately ended up in San Antonio. And I decided after that to really explore the missions. I'm a religious education teacher at my parish and have been for 20 years. And I started taking my students down to the missions to travel to them, to travel to that sacred space. And since that time, I've taken my parish and my enthusiasm just grew. And I was so happy to have the opportunity to speak with Archbishop and really get his vision of what an El Camino to our missions could be. And that is really what brought me to this program that I'm now very much involved with.
Beautiful. So could you tell us just a little bit more? I know we're going to really delve in deeper at the end of the program, but what basically is El Camino de San Antonio Missions?
So the El Camino de San Antonio Missions is an archdiocesan program that really is here to support pilgrims and even tourists or visitors who want to have a pilgrimage experience by going to the sacred space of our missions. And the whole goal of any pilgrimage is to really be transformed. And by that transformation, go out into the world and change the world. And so really, it is an evangelization effort to really go out and use our sacred space to really have interior transformation.
Awesome. Well, I just love that. And I know that'll really excite a lot of people that are listening and intrigue them. So we'll definitely learn more about that as we kind of make our pilgrimage today. But let's start off with, I have family coming into town this week, and we know that one of the things that people are so fascinated by is the Catholic roots, the Catholic origins of San Antonio. It's really evident. I mean, even when you go to the airport, just drive into town a little bit, you pass by a church, you pass by a shrine, you see these different statues, right? It's just so evident. And so We're going to begin our spiritual pilgrimage now through our roots of San Antonio, Texas, beginning with a stroll downtown, at the heart of downtown, at the famous Riverwalk of San Antonio. We're going to start east of the Alamo Street Bridge near Commerce Street, and we're going to see this bronze statue of San Antonio, that is Saint Anthony de Padua, or in his native Spanish, San Antonio de Padua, right? So he is in his traditional Franciscan garment, and he's holding open the gospel book, and he's carrying the infant Jesus in one arm, while in the other he's holding lilies representing his purity of intention, his purity. And this sculpture was created by Leopoldo de Almeida and presented to the city by the Portuguese government at the 1968 Hemisphere. And the inscription reads, San Antonio, for whom the city and the river are named, gift of Portugal. And many people might not know that St. Anthony was from Portugal originally. And then, of course, we know him through the Spanish, but just a little insight there as well. And we talk about San Antonio on other Journeys of Hope episodes as well. Well, we're going to stroll now to the stage and the amphitheater called the Arneson River Theater. And there is a plaque in the pavement commemorating the site of the first Catholic Mass in San Antonio. This historical marker is accompanied by a sculpture by Roland Briceño, symbolizing the first Catholic Mass held in San Antonio. The marker and the sculpture were installed in 1991. On June 13th, 1691, the feast day of San Antonio de Padua, the expedition of Father Damian Massenet, a Franciscan missionary, and Domingo Terran de los Rios, first governor of Texas, pitched camp alongside the Coahuiltecan indigenous peoples, who were noted as being friendly. This was when Father Massenet named the area San Antonio for St. Anthony, since it was his feast day. The following morning was a celebration of the feast day of Corpus Christi, which is a Catholic celebration of the body of Christ present in the Eucharist or Holy Communion. Father Massenet built an arbor of cottonwood trees where an altar was placed to offer Mass. He recorded, quote, "The Indians were present during these ceremonies, and the military fired a great many salutes," unquote. So, Rebecca, here we are revisiting this beautiful moment in our city's history. What would you like to share about the very beginning of San Antonio and, maybe what the meaning of the name had for those who began this city, or what it continues to have for us today?
So that expedition was when they first kind of came upon the San Antonio area and what became known as the San Antonio River. But it really wasn't until 18 years later that they came back again, right? The Franciscans did, and they established the first mission, the San Antonio de Valero mission, which we now know as the Alamo. And they also had the Presidio, and they had that as well, the Villa de San Antonio de Bear. And so in 1718 is really when the city and the mission occurred. And so they took that name, San Antonio, probably because it is one of the strongest Franciscan saints that we have. And so as the patron saint of travelers and priests and the poor as well, I think that was a strong name that they were looking for to use as well.
Absolutely. When we talk about St. Anthony, it's so true. Oftentimes when we think of the Franciscans, of course, we go to St. Francis of Assisi. Rightly so, of course, the founder of the Franciscan order. But at the same time, when you get to know St. Anthony de Padua, right, there's so much to learn from him. I mean, he is one of the foremost preachers in the history of our faith. And he is said to have really been a preacher whom anyone and everyone could be touched by, right? Even the animals, it is said, the fish, he would preach to the fish, and the fish would leap out of the water hearing the good news of Jesus Christ. And, to me, that really speaks to the current reality of San Antonio because, Rebecca, I'm sure you could speak to this as well, but, just coming from San Antonio already, so many years ago, it was and has been a diverse city, a city of so many different kinds of people. And even now, it is growing to be more so, not only with various persons from within the United States coming to move into San Antonio, but also folks who are immigrating and those that are refugees are resettling in San Antonio. So to me, when I think of just how San Antonio de Padua was someone who could reach anyone with his words, that says to me that San Antonio, Texas, can be a place of meeting and encounter as well. I don't know if you have any other insights just from, working within the Archdiocese as well.
Right. So we are here. That's one of the roles for El Camino, is to encounter and accompany, as we are desired to accompany, pilgrims along their journey, right, to our missions. And so we are here not just for Catholics, we're here for people of all faiths who desire to have that transformative journey and desire to see the missions and see something more authentic and sacred rather than just a historic structure. And so I think St. Anthony de Padua certainly speaks to us as a contemporary of St. Francis, who recognized what a preacher he was. And the one thing I would say in looking at St. Anthony's story, he started out wanting to be a hermit. He took the name St. Anthony because St. Anthony, the older St. Anthony, was a patron of hermits. And he thought that was God's plan for him. But like many of us, when we open our hearts and really understand what God is trying to tell us, he became the foremost preacher of his time, recognized by St. Francis to preach in Italy. And that's how he got the name Padua, because that's, of course, an Italian city. And he preached to thousands and brought Christ to thousands. And so of a very diverse time and very diverse people, as you mentioned. So that's one of the things that I always think is so wonderful about St. Anthony, is that he did open his heart and realize his desires were not really the gifts God gave him to be a preacher. And so he accepted that gift and found his way.
Right. It's so true. There's so many times when all of us might feel that way, might feel like hesitant, like we have our own idea of how we're supposed to serve God, and then sometimes we get surprised, just like St. Anthony did. He wasn't planning on becoming a preacher, as you said, but, the Franciscans found out that he had so many academic and scholarly gifts, that he knew the scriptures very well from being an Augustinian. And then when he became a Franciscan, I suppose he was just ready to give all that up and just be the simple mendicant friar that the Franciscans were. And that's a sign of humility as well that we can learn from St. Anthony, just realizing that, sometimes we just have to do as the present moment calls us to. And yet, because he was obedient to that, he found himself in this new position, these new responsibilities. Rebecca, as I was just thinking about our discussion, I'm really thinking about how, we as San Antonians, we may have certain expectations of how we're being called to live, here in this city. And yet, as our city continues to grow and develop, and we welcome so many other new peoples, we may be called, like St. Anthony, to a new vocation, right? To live out our faith in a new way. I'm excited that as we continue on this pilgrimage, that we'll learn about how, El Camino de San Antonio missions and so many other different opportunities and invitations there are for us to open ourselves up to God in new ways. So this is really exciting. I'm glad that we're learning from St. Anthony already on this pilgrimage. So let's continue now down our pilgrimage through the San Antonio River. We've just talked about, where the first Catholic Mass was celebrated. And, the San Antonio River, it has always been a treasure to the people of this area, including those who lived here prior to the first Catholic Mass. The namer of San Antonio, Father Massonet, recorded in his report, "I named this place San Antonio de Padua because it was his day. In the language of the Indians, it is called Yanaguana." The Yanaguana was important for the native peoples. The spring that forms its headwaters was known as the Blue Hole and was considered a sacred location. Dr. Richard Bruce Winders is the Alamo Director of Education and Curation. He explains why the San Antonio River's headwaters were so sacred. For most natural springs, quote, "the rate of flow fluctuates, and some springs even dry up in times of low rainfall. Other springs, like the one that forms the headwaters of the San Antonio River, flow more consistently, producing enough surplus to form a creek or river. Since all living things need water, wildlife and indigenous people naturally sought out these springs, where grass, shrubs, and trees could be found. Today, the spring that forms the headwaters of the river is located on the campus of Incarnate Word University. Located nearby is another spring that forms San Pedro Creek. Archaeologists have found evidence that humans occupied around these springs as early as 12,000 years ago," unquote. So, the river, the San Antonio River, is a great gift to those of us who live here. And it has been so for thousands of years. I just find that a beautiful, amazing gift to learn about. And I know, Rebecca, as well, the river has a connection with the San Antonio missions. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, without the San Antonio River, there would be no missions, because for the missionaries to establish a mission, they needed water. Water was life. And so they needed a ready source of water close by in order to water their crops, in order to water the animals that they domesticated, and frankly, just to have fresh drinking water to drink. So it was just critical. And so the missions are all along the San Antonio River. Thankfully, they're connected now by the San Antonio River Trail for the most part. So you can actually walk that connection between the river and the mission very easily.
Beautiful. As your experience has led you and sort of you've gained this wisdom about the river, the San Antonio River, I'm wondering, Rebecca, if you could share with us, how many people, what are people's intentions, or what have you learned about people who visit the river? Is there something that is particularly that brings people to the river these days? Just any insights about why people visit the river?
So the San Antonio River south of town is just a beautiful creation. There are incredible wildlife, plants, flowers, and it is an incredibly contemplative place. You can bike down there, you can walk down there, people are fishing down there, people are kayaking down there. It is just a true gathering spot. And there is, of course, the trails between the missions would have been down there back during mission time. The water ran a little higher back then, and so they could travel by boat on that river. But importantly, there are remnants of dams that were built in the 1700s and something called an acequia, which is another way of saying a canal. And those canals exist to this day all over San Antonio, but they still contain water and they still water some of the crops down in the south. So the acequia from Espada and the acequia of San Juan are still in use. And that is a remarkable thing to me.
It is, as we're even living here today in San Antonio, the fact that not only can we look back at our roots in history books and hear stories about them, but that we can actually see, touch, taste, feel our history in reality, even today. That is such a gift. I know Pope Francis speaks so much about the importance of knowing our roots and being connected with our roots, with the older generations, with those who are elders and who carry those stories of the past that can teach us so many lessons. And, that's one of the reasons why I think it's beautiful that the San Antonio missions are such a gift for us here in San Antonio. And especially with the river, as you said, the connection with the river, water has such an important role in the symbolism and reality of how we practice our faith in the Catholic faith. As pilgrims, as we're taking a pilgrimage, we take these times to really pause and consider, right, to reflect on the importance of these symbols that we find along our journey. And so I'd like to talk with you about that a little bit because, I recall even when you go to the missions, various missions, you see, for example, the symbol of the shell, symbolizing baptism in one part, right? Being carved on the stone in some of the missions. And I don't know if you could speak to that.
Sure. So what we have to recall is that the people of the missions were the local Coahuiltecan people that were brought in. So the Franciscans used all kinds of symbols which they would be familiar with, and things of importance like water that they certainly were familiar with to communicate. So the shell is depicted on Mission San Jose on the exterior, on almost all the missions. You will find a shell somewhere in their motif. And that was welcoming them through baptism to their new family, to their new life. And really the front of the doors of the portal at San Jose is a fabulous example of that welcoming to their new family with St. Anne and Mary, St. Joaquin, with the Franciscans, St. Francis and St. Dominique, and also with, of course, the Virgin of Guadalupe and St. Joseph, all depicted there, so that when you walk in, you're joining your family. And then the shell evidencing new life. So you can look for many of these symbols and get a better understanding of what were they messaging 200 years ago, 300 years ago, to explain this new life that the converts were coming into.
Right. There are so many different beautiful ways that nature can speak to our faith. And I think that the Franciscans, the way that they have used nature to introduce the Christian faith to so many peoples, but including the local peoples here in Texas, is really fascinating. And it really kind of goes even back to, of course, Jesus, right? And how he would preach the gospel, that he would use these very simple, everyday, natural images of crops, of how things grow, of the seasons, to just communicate these simple truths of faith and also just of God's love, that God loves us and continues to grow and nurture us in so many ways.
So one of the examples I would tell you of a very simple natural item that was here in San Antonio were pomegranates. And if you look on the motif, for instance, on the portal at San Jose, you'll see lots of those little pictures of pomegranates. And they would use that because, as you know, when you slice into a pomegranate, you see those many seeds. So that was a way to explain the church in one body composed of many. And so they would use different things like that, of course, to explain the faith to the converts.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's just so full. You go into a church, sometimes you don't realize that even the foliage and the flowers and the fruits that you see in the sacred art, all of that has meaning. All of that is there for an intention, for a purpose, to communicate the faith and to communicate something about our faith. And that's something that we continue to discuss on Journeys of Hope. So listeners, if you're interested in learning more about that, certainly listen to Journeys of Hope episodes. But of course, also, we can come visit Rebecca Simmons and El Camino de San Antonio and learn about the specific images and symbols that are on our missions, that are in our churches, that are not only there, but that we can see then in our own parish communities as well, and in other sacred art that we may encounter throughout our lives, no matter where it is. So friends, you're listening to Journeys of Hope. I'm Angela Sealana, here with Rebecca Simmons, Executive Director for El Camino de San Antonio Missions. We'll be taking a short break, but right after this, we will continue our journey and learn about opportunities that are available for us today to continue appreciating the Catholic roots of San Antonio, Texas. Stay with us.
Hello, everyone. We're taking a short break to bring you an exciting announcement. Pilgrim Center of Hope is pleased to announce an extraordinary project which has been 10 years in the making. Who is the Man of the Shroud is a groundbreaking new streaming media series, which will explore the facts from science, art, history, and more as it relates to the Shroud of Turin. All episodes will be available in podcast and video formats. Here's the trailer.
Each of these blood stains has a serum stain around it, but this is real blood.
Blood stain here, blood stain there, the marks on the front of his body, the marks on the back of his body, the mark on the side of his body, the marks of the crown of thorns, the nails. You really realize that this was agonizing, and yet these images are very calm.
For millennia, the sands of time reveal many mysteries.
Fossils and antiquities from pre-recorded history, such wonders as the Sphinx and pyramids of ancient Egypt. Then there are objects of mystery and awe tied to actual events themselves. There's been historical evidence of one piece of cloth which may be the grandest artifact of them all. Or is it?
On this cloth, an image is somehow transfixed or transferred to the linen fibers, impeccable and unarguably a photographic negative of a man whose body bears the mark of excruciating torture. How can this be? 1,500 years or more before that technique was even possible? But the most important question, who is the Man of the Shroud?
They were hardcore scientists from Los Alamos and Sandia and Jet Propulsion Lab and the Air Force Weapons Lab. These were not a bunch of religious fanatics. Our prime focus simply was to determine, how is that image formed? Is it a painting? Is it a sculpture? Is it a photograph? Or what?
It was a game changer.
In a groundbreaking new series from Pilgrim Center of Hope, through the world's leading scholars in science, medicine, art, history, and more, we explore the very mystery of the ages. To tell this interwoven tale 2 millennia in the making, our series will leave no stone unturned. Not to answer the question, but to let you decide. Who is the Man of the Shroud?
I'm Bill Field, your series host. Join us on this extraordinary evidence-based journey of discovery.
Wow, we are excited to bring the first episode to you. We invite you to sign up to receive exclusive insider updates and be notified when new episodes are streaming at discoverwho.org. That's discoverwho.org. Now, let's jump back into the episode.
Welcome back to Journeys of Hope. Our journey today is a unique spiritual pilgrimage through the Catholic roots of San Antonio, Texas. Joining us on this way is Executive Director of El Camino de San Antonio Missions, Rebecca Simmons. Rebecca, let's talk about the San Antonio Missions in particular, because they're such a tourist attraction, but they started off as something very different, of course. So can you tell us a little bit about how the missions began here in San Antonio?
So the missions began really with the people that were located here, the Coahuiltecan indigenous people who were here. And as you mentioned, there had been exploration in this area in the 1600s, and they recognized that there were people here that were friendly and that were willing to hear more about Christ. And so the Franciscans were on fire in Central and South America in terms of converting and working with the people who lived there. And they felt compelled to go out to all nations and spread the gospel. That was the Franciscan job, was to spread that gospel. So they came up to San Antonio, into this area, and recognized the first one was the San Antonio de Valero, the Alamo, and they built that as a community. And so interestingly, at that time, there were Apache and then later Comanche that were very warlike, that were destroying the local communities that existed here. They would kill adults, they would steal their children, they would take any sort of goods that these people had. And so they were happy and wanted to come into a community to learn more about Christ and also to have protection. So the San Antonio missions are quite different. The walls that you see around, if you go to Mission San Jose or some of the other ones, they always built defensive walls to protect themselves. So that's one difference. You won't find that anywhere else. It's one of the reasons we are a World Heritage recognized site, is that we have these incredible missions. They're also close by. If you go to California, the missions are 20 plus miles apart. Here, they're about 3 and 4 miles apart. And it was done defensively so that they could call on the Presidio and try and get some troops to help them. Remember that these missions might have 300 people living there, but only perhaps 2 friars. So they had to be taught self-defense. So guns were provided to the inhabitants to learn self-defense. They also self-governed. They elected their own mayor, their own judge, and self-governed. But make no mistake, the Franciscans were the overriding, authority, but they govern themselves in many respects. That's all very different from perhaps these other other areas. And finally, the goal, which most people don't understand, the goal was to create a community whereby the Franciscans move on. And we call that secularization. That's not a failure. That's the success. When the Franciscans, who are missionaries, move on. Now, they stayed in San Antonio 70 years, far more than, or more than they probably should have, but they wanted to build a strong community. And unlike most places, the goal was to make these people faithful Spanish citizens. And by doing so, they could then become, as time went on, they became Mexican citizens and ultimately citizens of the United States. And so that sort of new population of people is also one of the cultural heritages we have. San Antonio is a mix of these people, including these converts, to create a new society quite different from most places. And fabulously, we have records of a lot of these people from the sacramental books. So we know the names of the early entrance into these missions. So it's just a joy and a gift to see this new civilization come about and see these people prosper and become citizens of the United States ultimately. Very different from the reservation type of mindset that was going on in other parts of the country, where you move them out of the way and there was no thought that they would become citizens. That did not occur until the 1920s for many of our Indian nations. So it's quite different and to me, a beautiful story.
Yeah, one of the things that and thank you for that. One of the things that I really appreciate about, learning more about the history of so many different places is that you realize that history is so complex, right? That there are so many different iterations of, perhaps some stories that we may hear. For example, that, such and such peoples were warlike, such and such peoples were peaceful, that these people did this and these people did that, and that's just the way it was everywhere. But in reality, when you look at the specific, regions and areas, histories, you learn a little bit more about the nuance, right? The complexity of the situations. And obviously, there is so much more to say, that we can even discuss here in the short program with our goals for today. But that's one of the things that we can continue to learn about, right, as those who live here in San Antonio, as well as those who are visiting, to really appreciate that unique history of San Antonio. So thank you for sharing a little piece of that. And, for me, the treasure is to realize that we have this gift of we were talking earlier in the program about communication, cooperation, diversity of peoples. And certainly we see that the Native peoples here, they did keep so many of their customs, their ways of living the day-to-day that they have contributed to San Antonio. And also, yes, bringing in, of course, right, the Spanish citizen aspect of that in order to, continue to be part of what was occurring throughout the Texas and greater, area. As we visit the missions, it's an opportunity for us to reflect on that mutual history between those who were the newcomers to the New World and the Native peoples. And so it is important for us to preserve that. So I'd like to ask you about, how are the missions being preserved today?
So when you talk about the preservation of the missions, of course, one of the things you're talking about are structures. right? And so the mission structures look very solid, but they're actually very fragile. They're, 250 plus years old. And so great care is taken. They're a World Heritage Site, but they're also, landmarks and federal landmarks. So there is, a 10-year plan for all of the maintenance and upkeep and major work that needs to be done on the mission. So that structural part is being taken care of by an entity known as Las Misiones. And it is charged with being the one that kind of takes care of those mission churches, because the poor parishes couldn't, pay for the money. So that's one thing. The other thing, though, that we really have to work on is that these are living communities, and we spend a lot of time trying to let tourists know that they're not museums, that they are graced as living communities with ties back to the 200 years ago. So they continue to celebrate, often in the ways that they celebrated 200 years ago. They used the Spanish language back then. They were big. The Feast of Corpus Christi was incredibly important to all of those missions, with processions and that sort of thing. And we will even have a procession at San Jose, very similar to what they would have had in the past, on our Feast of Corpus Christi this year on June 19th. Some of the customs they have, the matachines, which are these Indian or native dancers with roots in the native kind of dancing, they dance during the Feast of the Virgin of Guadalupe in December. And so these 200-year-old customs continue in these living churches, but also new graces are brought in too as well. Mass is now in English, in terms of, or in Spanish, but not in Latin anymore. But they still celebrate their baptisms and their marriages and their sacraments. They still highly regard the Eucharist, of course. And in fact, the Rose Window was probably used as an exhibition of that Eucharist, which is why they would have such a fabulous, beautiful window at Mission San Jose. So traditions still exist, but it's continuing on. And many of the people in these churches are probably descendants of those initial people in the community. So the communities continue strongly in San Antonio at each of these mission parishes.
Yes, that's right. If you ask around enough in San Antonio, you'll find people, right, whose history, whose family ancestry is tied to one or more of the missions. And for myself, I have met people who throughout my life who have been very proud of being associated with the missions. One I'm thinking in particular of their connection to Mission San Jose, and just how they continue to yes, as you're saying, it's not an old museum piece. These missions are still their parish, their faith home, and something that connects them to family members for hundreds of years. So these family members continue to this day to build up those parishes, be part of the parish festivals, and to attend services, of course, to build up the communities as well. So yes, that again is one of the unique, beautiful things about the missions here in San Antonio, is that, the history, when we look back at history, it is not just, again, something we can just read about and learn from, but it continues to this day. And that's the reality of all history. So we have that with us in San Antonio. And I feel that gives our city a certain unique quality, that we realize the importance of our roots and where we come from, and that we value that we continue to preserve that. And I really feel like, each of the mission structures and properties are sort of like the embodiment for us as San Antonians of that value, right? Of that characteristic of preserving history and holding on to these beautiful traditions, and also maybe some of the difficult, past as well, that we continue to learn from that. And so, Rebecca, one of the things that you are doing specifically to help us with that is to direct El Camino de San Antonio missions, not only to visit and admire the missions, but to make an intentional journey of faith amongst them. So please, could you tell us more about what is El Camino de San Antonio? Why is it called that? And how can we benefit from it?
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, it is a program of the Archdiocese, but its main focus is to basically encourage and support people who want to make a faith journey to these missions, who want to visit them as something more than just a tourist, to experience the graces and the transformation of their soul, and then transform the world by doing so. So what we do is we offer assistance for people who want to visit our missions in that way. We offer recommendations. We offer guides that can assist them, paper guides that help with reflections. We have them for Lent. We have them for Advent, for Christmas season, for Easter. So we create these programs. We're very happy that we have a structure behind Mission Concepcion, the old chapel of the theology school back there is now going to be a pilgrimage center and a place where you can go learn more about pilgrimages, learn much more about the San Antonio missions. I have taken many groups up and down the river, both walking, bicycling, and by bus and car, to help them gain a better understanding of these missions. We hope to have docents within all the mission churches that can answer questions that people might have about them. Our focus is really, as I said, not just on Catholics. It is on, people of all faiths, to have that contemplative, I think walking, or at least walking a piece of it, is very important. That contemplative sort of journey with an intention. It can be an intention of thankfulness, one seeking forgiveness, one for, all kinds of things in your life. But to have that type of pilgrimage feel, and then go to these sacred spaces and let them infuse you with God's grace. There have been thousands of sacraments done there, and you just feel the God's grace there. There are many things to see and to understand at each of them. So that is what the program's doing. We have a specific trail that we've developed. It's about 20 miles. It goes along the river to all of the missions and to the cathedral. We have a passport and stamps, and we're trying to implement that program. So that is just kind of in its seminal stage. So we are doing a few of those now, but we're hoping by the end of the year to really roll out the full, you can go get your passport, you can get your passport stamped, kind of like the El Camino de Santiago, which is in Spain, that some people may be familiar with. And in the end, you'll get a Compostela, you'll get a certificate of completion. And in that way, we're hoping more people can not just enjoy, but really experience our missions. I will tell you one thing. Can I say something about Father Marhill,
yes.
or Padre Marhill? because that's who the Pilgrimage Center will be named after. So Padre Margil is probably the finest example of our Franciscan missionaries in all of Central, North, and South America. He came from Spain, but once he got to Mexico, which is where he traveled to, he began his journey as a missionary and traveled all the way to Nicaragua, to Guatemala, to Chiapas, and these are totally undeveloped areas, at the time. But he is the founder of our San Antonio Mission San Jose. He traveled north into Texas, and what inspires me about him, he called himself nothingness itself. He was the most humble man, but he sent back reports about all that he was doing. And he traveled by himself and converted thousands. But what I feel like we should learn from Padre Margil is that he, when he was called back to be president of this colegio in Zacatecas, he was called back from San Antonio and went there for a year. And I can't imagine his frustration because that is not what he felt called to do. But the day they said, your term is up, he walked out the door and stopped with a young new priest and said, come with me and set the world on fire. And he did. And so he left and went on his journey of missionary work. And he is venerable at this point, but they are pushing forth his canonization there in Rome. And so we're hopeful that we will soon have a saint that is the founder of Mission San Jose.
Wow, that's really exciting. Father Margil is definitely a legendary figure in San Antonio history, and as you were saying, the history of so much of this greater region of the world. And the fact that the Pilgrimage Center will be named after him is really exciting. And just so many of the opportunities that you were describing are great opportunities for groups, for families, even individuals, friends. If you are interested in learning about El Camino de San Antonio missions, definitely contact the Archdiocese and Rebecca Simmons there to learn more. And Rebecca, how can they do that?
Well, they can go to the Archdiocesan website. There is a El Camino, a small little blurb about El Camino, but it has my information there. So they can track me down through the Archdiocese. They can also go to the website of something called Las Misiones. And that is the website that deals with preservation, but I'm also the director of that. So they can contact me through that website as well.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely link to all of those on our website as well, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. So if you're a regular listener of Journeys of Hope or familiar with Pilgrim Center of Hope, find our Journeys of Hope page about this episode and you'll get connected to all of that good content there. One of the great and exciting things about this for us at Pilgrim Center of Hope is certainly that this is a pilgrimage opportunity. And, pilgrimage, as you were speaking about, there are so many different reasons, different things that spark people's interest in making a pilgrimage. Sometimes it is just the basics of, I want to go see that thing and I want to go learn about it. But in reality, what a pilgrimage does, going back to the very beginnings of our faith with Abraham and Moses and Jesus, the Virgin Mary, making pilgrimages, making these journeys of faith with an intention of following God's will, of seeking God's will, that when we do that, and we have the proper preparation, just like El Camino de San Antonio Missions is providing with these different materials and guides, that when we have that preparation and we are prayerfully, undergoing these journeys, what we're doing is we are cooperating with God's grace. Grace just means the living in the divine nature. So God gives us these gifts to be able to experience a little bit of God's own life in our life. And that's just amazing. I mean, it's so exciting to think about that we can cooperate with God in this beautiful way of saying, I'm going to go and I'm going to make this journey. And when we do that, our will, our mind, our spirit, our intentions are transformed just by making that initial decision and following through with it. Because again, we're cooperating with God in this unique way that touches not only our mind and our heart and our soul, our spirit, but our body as well, because we're walking, because we're traveling, because we're experiencing all of that in a journey. And that's why we at Pilgrim Center of Hope are so excited about pilgrimages, because they're truly personal transformation opportunities that are like prayers with our whole body and mind and spirit. I mean, it's just fantastic. Rebecca, I don't know if you have anything else to say about that, but I just love it.
Oh, I very much agree. And I think that it provides an opportunity, and what it always has done is you get out from social media, your phone, all of the things. You take that time, no phone calls, no business going on. We all lead harried and busy lives. So if you can stop that, even for a day, and take this contemplative walk, or do a pilgrimage to Jerusalem or something, your mind is then allowed really to focus more on your intentions that you're bringing with you, on God's will for you. And to me, that is, in this day and age, just an absolute benefit of any pilgrimage, is your ability to focus on God's grace.
That connects so well with our Jewel for the Journey, which is our tradition each week to give you a spiritual gem, listeners, that you can reflect on throughout the week. And we have a quote from St. Anthony de Padua, which says, "Actions speak louder than words. Let your words teach and your actions speak." So we can think about that as we go on pilgrimage. So let's pray together to conclude our pilgrimage, our audio pilgrimage today, in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. Lord God, we thank you. We praise you for this opportunity to take a short time out to learn more, to encounter you. And we ask that you continue to help us to be open to the gifts that you give us in our daily life. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Rebecca, thank you for joining us on Journeys of Hope. We will again connect everyone on our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org, with El Camino de San Antonio Missions. Thank you, Rebecca, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
And fellow pilgrims, we invite you to learn more about Pilgrim Center of Hope, our mission of evangelization, where we guide people to Christ and the church. You can visit us at pilgrimcenterofhope.org or call 210-521-3377. Fellow pilgrims, let's strive to live each day with love, faith, courage, and hope. Until next time, may God bless you and safe travels.
Journeys of Hope, a production of Pilgrim Center of Hope, guiding people to Christ. Visit our website at pilgrimcenterofhope.org.